Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video. Wanted to take a break from Spider-Man for a bit and play something different. Here we got some Saints Row 4. I wanted to take a moment to talk about Saints Row as a whole and where it currently stands, especially given with what has happened with Volition. TLDR, the Saints Row reboot ended up being a massive failure even though Embracer was able to make a return on their investment. It did so bad that Embracer Group decided to do a complete restructure with how they operate, and one of the decisions that they made was having Volition close their doors. Volition ended up closing their doors due to the failure of the Saints Row reboot, unfortunately. Recently some news came out about how the Saints Row reboot was being developed and how difficult it was for Volition to develop the game in the way that they wanted to, while having Deep Silver intervene in different aspects in regards to how the game would be distributed. So for those who do not know, Saints Row ended up getting a reboot in August of last year. The series ended up making its return after a 9-year hiatus. The last full entry in the Saints Row series was Saints Row 4. We did get a standalone expansion in the form of Gat Out of Hell in January of 2015, but the less we talk about it, the better. The way how Saints Row 4 ended, Volition made it out to be that this was going to be it for the series as a whole, when in reality, they were going to be taking a break from Saints Row to develop other games. And while they did decide to reboot Saints Row, not everybody was very excited about how this game was going to come about, especially given how it was revealed. Not everybody was happy at all with how Saints Row was going to be making its return. And I'll admit, I was one of those people, where it was about a group of millennials who decided to turn to becoming gangsters as a way to pay their bills and pay off their student loans and such. It just sounded so weird. And it was an idea that just didn't gravitate to a lot of people. When the game dropped, it ended up becoming a failure due to how unpolished it was, the amount of bugs and glitches that people were experiencing on a variety of platforms. It was clear that the game was not ready to launch in the state that it did. A Twitter user and YouTuber who goes by RPG Gameplay is a Saints Row YouTuber who has been making content on the Saints Row series throughout its entire lifespan. Very recently, he made a tweet where he revealed some additional information about how the Saints Row reboot was going about in terms of development and how difficult it was for Volition to polish the game to the developer's standards. On top of that, how often Deep Silver intervened with the development of the game. So here is the tweet that RPG Gameplay posted to his Twitter account. There's a lot to unpack here, so I'm going to go over each piece and just give my personal take on what has happened. The original pitch for the game was going to be a sequel/reboot to the ending of Saints Row 4. The way I see it, it looks like they were aiming to do a soft reboot, kind of like how Infinity Ward did with Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019. Brought back the characters from the original Modern Warfare trilogy while simultaneously telling a whole new story with the same cast of characters while also introducing newer ones along the way. It's almost like Volition was aiming to do something like that, but with their new Saints Row title. The fact that the story had to be rewritten 3 to 4 times during its development is crazy to me. I honestly think this had to do with Deep Silver intervening in how they should tell their story, which should never have happened. It was supposed to be a simple story of how some millennial-aged adults just got into crime to pay the bills. On paper, it sounds like a good idea, but in execution, the presentation was just not what we, the fans, wanted. But sadly, Deep Silver said otherwise. Whole previously unplanned missions were added into the production cycle of the game just to make the characters make more sense and hope the player would care about them more. It was impossible for us to care about the characters that they showed us in the game. I understand the publisher is trying to meet their mandates and deadlines to be able to please their investors, but constantly getting in the way of Volition's storytelling skills to try to present the game in the way that they believe should is not the way to go. And sadly, Deep Silver intervened way too often to where people at Volition had no choice but to quit. Such a shame, man. They did not deserve this. I'm just gonna go ahead and say this right now. I do not support the idea of a dev studio crunching just to meet the deadline that a publisher has set for them. I'm not a game developer, so I'm not sure how complex and how complicated game development is, which I'm almost positive that it is very complicated to tackle. I believe a dev studio should never have to be put in a position where they have to crunch in order for the game to be shipped in a state that they know is not ready. This is what happens when you force a dev studio to crunch all together so you can meet your deadline. Totally unacceptable, and nobody at Volition should have had to put up with this. It's honestly ridiculous. You shouldn't be giving bonuses to employees at a dev studio who are trying their utmost to meet a deadline that is impossible to meet. This game was going through development hell, and yet Deep Silver still set an unrealistic expectation that was impossible for Volition to meet. The people at Deep Silver shouldn't be looking down on those who worked at Volition because they were unable to meet the unrealistic demands that the publisher, set. The reveal for Saints Row 2022 was such a disaster. So many people across social media were so disappointed in what the game was going to be presented as, especially when you look at the screenshots that were posted on Twitter leading up to the reveal. It looked as if the series was going to go back to basics and be more of a serious, grounded gangster style game that the original Saints Row was. I'm giving my response on this tweet where I said, from the looks of it, leadership failed Volition. Deep Silver has no clue what makes Saints Row flourish as an IP. This is another example of a big AAA game publisher setting unrealistic expectations for a dev studio to meet, knowing full well it's bound to fail. One person ended up retweeting RPG's tweet and said, I wonder if this is what Mr. Saints Godzilla 21 hinted at ages about Saints Row 2022 not being what he was shown years ago. We wait for that NDA video. Still waiting on that NDA to be lifted from Mr. Saints Godzilla 21. I really want to know what he was shown and for him to be able to give his full thoughts on what he was shown versus what we actually got. I'm still waiting on that. The way I see it, leadership failed Volition. Big time. It's such a shame because I'm almost positive Volition had their ideas on what they wanted the Saints Row reboot to be, but unfortunately Deep Silver intervened way too often to where the people at the studio just lost faith and could no longer commit to it in the long haul. This statue is a complete resemblance of what I'm talking about. Killbane is Deep Silver, his opponent is Volition. Volition tried so hard to get Deep Silver to let them develop the game in the way that they believe it should be developed, tell the story in the way that it would be fitting and satisfying for us, the consumer, to invest in, but sadly, Deep Silver ended up prevailing, they won, and because of that, Volition ended up going out of business. It really sucks to see leadership failing a dev studio so hard with their poor management skills. Had Deep Silver allowed Volition to go all in with the story that they wanted to tell, the gameplay that they wanted to go with, had they had just let Volition do their thing and develop it with all the time that they needed, I'm almost positive we would have gotten a more polished and more fleshed out entry for Saints Row. But sadly, Deep Silver had other plans, and their plans squandered all the potential that the reboot had to be a hit, and it cost the people at Volition their jobs. The closing of Volition was such a blindside that us in the Saints Row community were not expecting at all. Another former Volition employee, Alexander Mejia, he ended up giving his thoughts on the closure of Volition and wanted to reassure people just how passionate and how invested the people at Volition were in developing the games that they were making for us to enjoy. I'm going to provide a link to his reaction in the description of my video so that way you can go and check it out, but from what he was talking about, he was so passionate about contributing to the development of the Saints Row games that he got to be a part of throughout his time at the company. It's such a wonderful video to watch that I really hope y'all will go check out and support. They wanted to make Saints Row 2.5, but unfortunately, Deep Silver, they believed that that kind of game just does not sell. Volition really wanted to make the Saints Row reboot be akin to Saints Row 2, But sadly, Deep Silver, they believed that that's not what sells copies, so they decided to do a complete 180 and go with what they think will sell copies. But deep down, the execution was going to fall flat. It really sucks for all of us because I'm almost positive that we would have loved to have experienced a next-gen version of Saints Row that is on par with the quality that Saints Row 2 provided 15 years ago. But sadly, Deep Silver got in the way with it and said, nope, this is how it's going to be presented, go with it, and let's hope it sells copies. I get it, you know, these AAA game publishers, they're not supposed to care because at the end of the day, they're more concerned with pleasing their investors and making as much money as they possibly can off an IP. But to have to constantly intervene in the creative direction that the dev studio wanted to stick with for their next game just so they can make something that you would be pleased with over the consumers who are the fact that Deep Silver wanted the dev studio to please them and their investors over the millions and millions of consumers who buy these games for us to be able to invest in really just goes to show just how little they care about pleasing the consumers. Volition was one of the longest standing dev studios in the gaming industry. It had been in business for 30 years. They had just celebrated their 30th anniversary back in June of this year, and then a few months later, they announced that the studio would be closing its doors. I know there's going to be some people who are going to go and still blame Volition for how they developed the game and all that, and while I understand that, at the same time, you have to point the finger at the publisher, because Deep Silver would not stop intervening in what Volition was trying to do and what they were trying to accomplish. For the most part, Deep Silver is in the wrong. Volition, in some way, shape, or form, they're still in the wrong due to some of the things that they decided to implement into the game that ended up being so convoluted and so unnecessary. But alas, here we are. It's been almost a month since Volition had to close their doors, and many people, myself included, are wondering, what's next for Saints Row? If you ask me, I don't think Deep Silver is going to be going forward with any plans regarding Saints Row for the time being, and possibly for the foreseeable future. I will admit, while Volition did make decisions that caused the Saints Row series to lose its identity, at the same time, no other dev studio understood what Saints Row was better than Volition. Who else is Deep Silver going to task with making a new Saints Row game? That remains to be seen. Regardless of what has happened, Deep Silver owns the Saints Row IP. They decide what happens with the series as a whole, gets to develop a new game for the franchise, and whether or not the series will continue in the foreseeable future. After the closure of Volition and with Deep Silver having the reins to the Saints Row IP, I can't see the franchise making a comeback in the foreseeable future. And even if it does, I have no clue who Deep Silver is going to bring on as a studio to make a new game for that franchise. To wrap this up, I do want to say that my heart does go out to the people who used to work at Volition. All of you, ladies and gentlemen, have so much talent that I believe could be beneficial to any projects that other dev studios are currently working on at the moment. And I pray to God get picked up by them so that way you can continue contributing to the games industry. Leadership has failed Volition. Deep Silver has absolutely no idea what makes Saints Row flourish as an IP. And seeing where the series is at right now, I highly doubt that it's going to be continuing in the foreseeable future. But there you have it. Those were my thoughts on the mismanagement of the Saints Row IP, especially with the recent Saints Row game that came out like over a year ago. Have you played the Saints Row reboot? If so, what did you think about it? Did you like it? Did you not like it? How do you make of all the news that we have read about in regards to how the Saints Row reboot was managed? Let me know in the comments down below. I want to know what you guys have to say. I wanted to step away from posting Spider-Man content because this was something that I really wanted to talk about with y'all. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, you're more than welcome to hit that like button. And if you enjoy this type of content, you're more than welcome to hit that subscribe button along with that bell notification so you could be notified of when I'm uploading my next video. But until then, thank you so much for watching. It's been your boy Discreet, and I'll catch you in the next video.